Morning, everyone, and welcome to the BVI Finance Breakfast Forum. We are thrilled to have you with us today for what promises to be an informative and engaging session. I am Elise Donovan from BVI Finance, and I will be your host for today's forum. Our special guest this morning is Mr. Glenford Malone, the Deputy Managing Director Regulation at the BVI Financial Services Commission. We are honored to have such an esteemed expert to share insights and updates on crucial regulatory matters. Mr. Malone, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Elise, for having me, and thank you and your team and BVI Finance for what I think it's a very fruitful partnership that we have to get the word out to the industry on regulatory and other matters, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion today.
Okay. On our agenda today, we will discuss a number of issues, including the Commission's progress on the implementation of the recommendations for the Mutual Evaluation Report, Trust Service Providers Desk-Based Review, as well as updates on the implementation of the Virtual Asset Service Providers regime, and of course, industry guidance that are in the pipeline. We will have a free-flowing discussion, and we will leave most of the time for question and answers. So please go ahead and place your question and answers in the Q&A section, and we'll address them throughout the session. I would like to, start with Mr. Malone. He's no stranger to most of us, so I won't go into getting a bio, but he is certainly someone who has led mutual evaluation reports across the region and has been the primary person spearheading BVI's mutual evaluation report. So we'll start with that, Glenford. Can you please provide us an overview of the progress the Commission has made in implementing the recommendations from the mutual evaluation report?
Thanks, Elise. Not sure I'm the primary, but one of the primary. There's a lot of other significant stakeholders as well involved in the process. And let me just start off, Elise, by saying much appreciation to the entire industry because since the mutual evaluation report has been published, we've been engaged with various pausing sectors of the industry, and the level of participation and feedback have been exceptional. Whenever we want any feedback, whenever we have questions, we reach out to folks from quick focus group for a few days, and everyone has been willing and able and providing their feedback, which I think bodes well for us. And what that has done is allowed us as a commission to make significant and quick progress on the recommended action. What I can say is that all of the recommended action that the commission has a role to play in, we have started those. Some of them we have close to the finish line. Many of them we have significant progress that we have made. I'll just talk a bit about a few legislative amendments. We've had most persons would have weighed in significantly on the BVI Business Companies Amendment legislation. That was out for public consultation. We also did with that a second series of consultation with a number of respondents to make sure that we got proper feedback from the industry. We also had about 2 separate meetings with Company Law Review Advisory Committee. So that just goes to show how significant we consider the consultations were. And whilst we're not doing any more consultations, and I would implore persons to take a look at the legislation when it has its first reading at the House of Assembly, I can categorically say it is significantly different from the initial draft. and we had taken on board a number of the comments, suggestions from the industry on various issues, and just to name a few surrounding concepts of nominee directors, concept of what the register of members should look like. We've taken a significant consideration on board. We've taken on board significant comments on penalties, etc. So the draft would look somewhat different, but still meet the requirements of the standards that we are trying to achieve. And I think that bodes well for our relationship with the industry. Sometimes they say we regulate, but we did take into consideration the industry's ability to engage in legitimate business at an efficient manner. There's also going to be amendments to the AML code, which is completed, Insolvency Act, which is a straight provision, Insurance Act, AML regulations, the Trustee Act in relation to beneficial ownership and control arrangements for trusts, including professional and non-professional trustees. Just for members, we did reach out to some extent to step on that amendment, so they would have had some feedback on that. So overall, there's a number of series of legislation which we've recently completed, which will be going hopefully shortly through the Ministry of Financial Services to the House, and you would have an opportunity to comment on those. So I implore you to look out for those. We've made some progress on our understanding of risk. Many of you, and again, let me say thank you for those who participated in our risk assessment working groups, those who have taken the time to respond to our TF risk assessment survey, as well as many of you in the banking, virtual asset, and TCSP sector, whom we have individually written to asking for specific data and for us, allow us to have a proper risk assessment. And we're hoping to complete those risk assessment by the end of August, and then after that, have some outreach to the industry. So we're making significant progress on those. Inspection and desk-based review, we'll talk a bit about that later, but I know many of you have received our letters. No, don't be frightened about the letters. We expect to see compliance, so you shouldn't have any issues. But we're doing a series of desk-based inspection as well as thematic inspection on various issues which we will talk about. That goes to our understanding of risk. We're issuing guidance. We'll talk some more about that later, but we're now finalizing some guidance on investment business and the like. Those should go out probably by the end of next month. We're looking at issues surrounding beneficial ownership and control. As I said, the amendments to the BC Act, the Trustee Act, the Limited Partnership Act would deal with the requirement for entities to maintain, collect, and keep accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership information. And again, that is something that the report had asked, and that is something we're currently working on. Also, just to say, and I think this is going to impact more the TCSP sector. We're doing a benchmark exercise on the context of the prudential returns as well as the AML returns as to whether or not they're sufficiently requesting the information that we want. We've come to the conclusion that they significantly contain the information we want, but we may need to make a few slight amendments and a few slight changes to ask for information in a more specific format. I don't think it would be any additional information that you don't collect or already submit in some way, shape, or form. But again, that is something we're considering and would likely, or maybe something that has to be submitted for the next reporting period. That is our aim, but I'm not certain we will be able to get there. And finally, Elise, we're making significant progress on outreach, which is why we're here today, having general open discussions with the industry on what it is um, we're gonna be doing. And just, I said finally, but just to touch on, we're also making significant movement on the VASP regime, which is what the report is asked, but we have more detailed discussion on that as we go along, Elise. But overall, we've taken the recommended action seriously. We've dedicated significant internal resources to move all of those recommended actions forward, and we're happy with the feedback and the collaboration we're getting from the industry, and we're hopefully that could continue in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenford. That's a lot. One of the things that stood out to me is that you said that based on the consultation and the feedback that you've gotten, the current draft looks quite different from the initial draft. What were the main, I know you touched on it a bit in terms of the concepts of nominee directors, et cetera, but what were some of the main challenges that caused the draft to be so vastly different from inception?
Well, I think that maybe vastly might be a different thing, but it's different. I think the issue really, and I would give the industry credit, is they really dissected what we put forward, and they came with clear research, clear points as to why certain things weren't the way we were putting them forward in terms of how to achieve the desired result. What we were happy with is that the industry didn't just say we don't want it. It said, well, here's how we think you can achieve it. And the reason why I use nominee director is because that was one of the biggest issues across the board. And I think the industry would be satisfied when they see how we were able to craft that, or not craft that, or perhaps not even use the term in the legislation at all. That is something that was clearly pointed out to us. There's some other significant issues. I don't want to get too specific, but just to be clear, the industry did, in my view, put their best foot forward in responding to that consultation, which we were very happy with.
Okay, you talked about the TSCPs and the desk-based review. Can you explain your recent findings as far as those reviews are concerned, and particularly as it relates to the suspicious activity reports?
Yes, and we continue to do those. We just started one set. Um, Most of the SARS issues are surrounding the thematic inspections that we're doing. Again, for us, uh, the issue that we're seeing and what we want folks to be clear on is, in order to file a quality SAR, you really need to understand your client. You really need to know what is suspicious. You really need to have some mechanism to monitor. And I think maybe the industry's tired of hearing me say this, but in order to monitor your clients, you have to know what the transactions are. You have to know something about the company, what the company does. You have to know perhaps issues, and we made clarifications in the explanatory notes to the regulatory code in 2023 about monitoring. For example, if you're monitoring a company, you get bank statements, and at the beginning they said the gross revenue is 3 million, and you're seeing gross revenue of 300 million, you need to be in a position to question whether your risk assessment and your monitoring and find out ways as to look into that, your risk, and say whether or not you're seeing anything that is particularly a suspicious activity. Granted, the great majority of entities, for the purposes that they're set up for, carry a limited amount of risk. And we don't say that you need to monitor every transaction, for example, in a holding company or any company. But you need to be able to identify from the beginning, Glenford Malone and Co. carries on an activity that I consider to be high risk in a high risk jurisdiction. Therefore, I monitor him and be able to identify when I file a suspicious activity report. Most of you would look from the report, and the report makes recommendations for specific outreach from the FSC, the FIA on filing of not not SARS per se, but quality SARS and the information. And the FIA and the FSC is working jointly to push out that outreach to the industry. Um, as I said, we'll talk about some guidance that we want to issue in relation to red flags. But from the commission perspective, we believe that quality of SaaS will increase once entities take more proactive approaches in monitoring the entities for which they act as agent, trustees, other type of service providers too.
Okay, I could go on and ask you more questions about that, but as I promised, most of it will be dedicated to getting questions from our attendees at today's session. And we already have 3 questions posted, so I'm just going to field those questions. Will consolidated laws and code be made available?
The answer to that is no. And I said that loosely because we want to consolidate the legislation. Um, there is some legal basis as to how we must do it in the BVI. I know the AG chambers have consolidated some legislation, and there is work on the way to consolidate others, as well as the Commission will take steps to ensure that financial services legislation, as best as we can, takes priority. So we want to do it, and we're going to take steps to do it, but it would not be immediately after the passage of these legislation. I think for us, um, it would be a priority to actually consolidate the BVI Business Companies Act because of the significant amendments. And that would be a priority for us, but it is not something that we can quickly do as in other jurisdictions for certain reason. But indeed, it is a fair point, and it is something that is on our agenda to make happen as soon as practical after the legislation is passed.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is regards to the changes to the AML code and regs. What changes can we expect to see in the AML code and regulations?
Well, I would say they're minor, but it is potentially a significant change. We There's going to be a change to the AML legislation to require MLROs to actually be approved by the Commission or the FIA. And that is because of the nature of the activity. Previously, for whatever entity, unless in the Commission's case, you provide them both compliance officer and MLRO functions. But now we're going to make that an approved person function effectively through the AML code and legislation. The other changes are sort of not material. They're kind of to cross the T and dot the I of some specific recommended action in the report. For example, there's one about group-wide policies, which we think is technically there already, but we're making a change to make it absolute. So I don't think it brings on any additional work for the industry as opposed to perhaps maybe through the BVI Business Company Act in terms of beneficial ownership, etc.
Okay, our next question is, we understand that the BVI Business Companies Act will require filing for UBOs at 10%. BOSS was 25%. It is not possible to export from BOSS as a short transitional period is anticipated. Would it be possible to advise the industry know exactly what fields are required for Virgin UBO register in order that data collection can commence whilst the regulations work their way through the process, or best a template on the updated schedule, on the upload schedule, that is.
Yes, and that's probably not a question I envisage, but is a very good question. Um, Frankly speaking, we've been given hints of what's going to be contained in the beneficial ownership type information. Even in the amendments to the BC Act, it has issues there about what needs to be submitted. I could say it's going to be similar to the Register of Directors. I will also say that most of you would know we're currently building the system to house that information. We have a plan to do a specific industry MTR on that um, that project, on what we're going to be asking to put into that portal, specifically what information you're supposed to be collecting and how to upload. So I don't want to, I'm not the one specifically dealing with that, so I don't want to put my foot in the mouth, but I can say it's going to be similar to the information from similar to registered directors, and some of the information similar to what's in BOSS. And we'll come to the industry specifically, and you'll have your ability to then ask those specific questions about what's the content, how fields are to be completed, when they're to be completed. We're still walking our way through when it's to be submitted and those type of things. But uh, my that is going to be at the end of closer to the end of August, where we're going to do a full MTR on it, which we would be able to answer all of the industry questions and concerns.
So is there not a template or anything you can start sending around so that they can prepare?
I would be hesitant to say so. I could have that discussion internally, but I know my folks internally would prefer to finalize the exactly what it is they require. That also includes getting the BC Act passed and the regulations, which would shortly be coming out as well. And then we'll be to the industry on what is contained. I don't think my view based on what I've seen and what my knowledge is that it's not so dissimilar, as I said, from the registered director information for the individual persons. There's going to be some nuance as to how you're able to put in information, upload information, what you need to put in relation to registered members, etc.
Okay. Our next question is on regarding the AML code and group-wide policies. It states that group-wide policies can be implemented or that a local policy must be implemented.
You could have a group-wide policy, but the group-wide policy must have regard for the laws of the BVI and the specific unique nature of the BVI in there. So while you have a group-wide policy, we wouldn't expect that you would apply necessarily Luxembourg law to BVI requirements. There might be differences that you have to specifically address.
With regard to the responsibility of the registered agent to receive the submissions of annual returns and to report companies to which they have not been received, if an annual return is received in the approved form with all figures in zeros, can the registered agent consider such annual return as having been submitted?
Well, that would have to be based on, again, in my view, if a company doesn't have assets, it doesn't have assets. If it doesn't have revenue undertaking activity, that is fine. But you have to, I say this to say, you also have to bear in mind, you're the agent. You should have an idea somewhat of what the company does. It goes back to or monitoring discussion. So if you're comfortable that yes, this company haven't engaged in any activity, then that is a properly filed document. I don't think there is anything that says it's not properly filed. If it's then incorrect and you become aware that it's incorrect, then you take the necessary steps. But that would be a properly filed document.
Okay. When will the FSC update the BOSS portal to upload the UBO TIN? Is this still a priority for the FSC?
The FSC doesn't have any connection to BOSS, but I would say that once we develop our portal, there would be no connection in terms of beneficial ownership requirements legally under the new requirements to the BOSS system.
Okay, so I guess we'll have to check with the IT on the TIN, etc. At the Miss BVI pageant held over the weekend, I believe many more persons in the Virgin Islands began to think of our financial services market, which was a great thing. However, I believe some people are partially or completely unaware of its current standing, its improvements, and any potential way it can improve. Can you shed a light on how the regulatory improvements mentioned today assist in making our BVI financial services competitive, other than not being blacklisted or graylisted, for example?
But I think it's an interesting question because some of the issues surrounding publicity of certain things are not necessarily within our regime. But I think from our perspective, what we try to do, again, these international standards are things we have to meet. And what we try to do is make sure that those standards doesn't fully impinge on the ability of persons to operate and to do business. Your reputation is key. Um, uh, if your reputation continues to be damaged, then you would have issues for your own operation and for the viability of the services that you provide. So the significant role that we play that we want to make sure is that our reputation remains intact. Where the reputation remains intact, then we can go out, or the relevant persons can go out and declare that come to the BVI and you would be able to do legitimate activities at a reasonable price and with the appropriate level of regulation and supervision. So again, one of the other things I think the question sort of alluded to is the industry itself has a role to play in saying to where there's certain products or services that it wants to see offered and how we can put a regulatory regime around those products and make them easy to use, easy to service, and be attractive to their clients as well.
Sorry about that. Pertaining to the approval of MLROs by the FSC and FIA, will there be any stipulations that the MLRO and deputy MLRO must be based in the BVI?
At this point, that would have to be no in the sense of some entities because some are not actually here. We'll have to give that some thought as to similar to the compliance officer function, etc., how that would work. But the expectation is that most entities, especially those with the presence in the BVI, should have the MLRO in the BVI and connected to the BVI. But that is something we're still walking our way through. Um, you have to understand the different nature of some of our industry. You look at the TCSP sector as opposed to the investment business sector, which is significantly a non-resident sector as opposed to the other one. So we'll give regard to each industry's uniqueness. I don't think the FIA itself have those particular problems given the nature of DNFBPs, but more so things that the commission would have to consider.
Can you confirm that any COs who are already approved and who are also MLROs can be grandfathered into the new regime and will be automatically approved?
I cannot confirm that, but that is the expectation that we are leaning towards right now, that those persons would be effectively grandfathered in. Technically, as we said, those would have already been approved. If you're a compliance officer of a company acting as an MLRO, we would have already approved you to act in those dual capacity. But from our perspective, we think we have to have a grandfathering principle for the existing MLROs currently.
Can the industry get some indication of the process to reporting that a client has not submitted the relevant FAR information?
Sorry, Elise, I didn't get the last. Which information?
Oh, sorry, the FAR.
Financial annual returns, I presume that's what that means.
Yes.
Yes, right now we are looking at how we build the Virgin system to receive such notification, because we expect that notification has to come. So we're looking at how to make that notification easier on the agent and ourselves together. So we'll get back, hopefully in a few weeks or so, we'll get back to the industry as to how that would be done. But we are looking at how such a notification would occur and making that, hopefully to make that more seamless for both us and the agent.
Can the industry, for AFR, must a company whose statements are consolidated with a large group break out its individual share of the overall revenue and expenses?
Must it do so? The question is asking. So maybe we need to have our next MTR and a financial annual return, but these are a lot of questions on the returns. The order speaks about the ability to use group statements and the ability to identify out the individual company. So that's what have to be done. They need to be able to identify out the individual company. I think at the beginning, since we've said, no, this is something that we're quite lenient on. That has to be something done by the company. The company makes that judgment and acceptable. So it would be, yes, it's clear you have to be able to identify that the specific company's records are there in the consolidated financials, some way, shape, or form.
In terms of zero filing for an annual return, can the director resolve that it is the true and accurate financial position of the company? Does this substantiate and validate the financial position of the company?
Again, those are not absolute yes or no answer. I think once you get the returns back and there's a resolution, that seems to be enough for you to come to the conclusion, this is what it is, unless there is something else that would trigger you to think it is not. So yes, that sounds in the grand scheme of things to be properly filed declaration, a properly filed return in that instance.
Glenford, I think some are having a little challenge hearing So if you can put the mic a
Okay.
little, please. Thank you. Will the definition of beneficial ownership under the AML and BOS be aligned? That there are a number of exceptions for BOS, such as the RLE and exempt persons.
There is not going to be any alignment with the BOS definition and the definition of beneficial ownership under the other relevant legislation. However, there's going to be exemptions in terms of beneficial ownership surrounding publicly traded companies. There's going to be certain exemptions surrounding a mutual fund. So we've taken on board generally some comments in relation to that, but it's not going to be the exemption you see in the BOS portal.
In terms of the template circulated by the FSC for the annual return, if the format is different, but the substance is exactly what the FSC is looking for, balance sheets and income statement, should this be accepted by the registered agent?
Well, we don't want persons to materially move away from the form, but if the form and the information you receive are materially consistent with the form, then yes. But we don't want you to sort of go and make changes and ask for different things and put in different stuff. But if it's the same, yes, we've said if it's materially the same, you can accept it.
Should the decision be not automatically approve the MLROs? Would they have to go to the full scope of requirements? I think this is referring back to one of your previous answers.
Well, if you're talking about the existing one, that's what we have to determine. That would be a challenge for anyone to say that the existing ones need to go through that process. But the new ones would go through the normal process of approval, etc. So we'll have a discussion, and I'm pretty sure we'll come to a mutually agreed term on grandfathered in existing regulated entities, MLROs.
In the recent approval letters for the licensees from the commission, we received requests to have registers of senior officers, etc. Can we expect the commission to provide the industry with updated guidelines on the commission's expectations re-licensed entities?
I'm not certain what the person is referring to, because I'm not sure we would have register of senior persons, but I think that person needs to specifically write and query their concerns, because I'm not certain we're going to be given any guidance on our expectation, because our expectations are there, but it might be that we may need to clarify, make our letters more clear. So if the person reaches out to me, I'll be able to take a clear look at that. But no, our expectations are generally the same. Once you are approved and appointed, we expect that you carry on the function, and that we would be holding you accountable to those functions. The purpose of those letters is really to say, as we say, if you look at the legislation, many of the legislation actually has a requirement that senior officers and directors can be held accountable for breaches if they're found to be culpable and allowing the breaches as well. And that is individual liability. So the purpose of those letters is to make it clear that you need to do what you're supposed to be doing, or else you may be the one, not just the company alone, you as a director, etc., could very well find yourself in a difficult position.
Sorry. What are the timelines and penalties defined clearly for non-filing of annual returns with the agent?
Well, the penalties are in the legislation. I don't have them offhand, but remember the non-filing, again, how this, excuse me, how this has to work is once the agent notifies us, then that starts to count, and then we will determine what action needs to be taken. So again, that's how that would work. The penalties are in the legislation, and we're finalizing those processes.
Will there be any fees in the Virgin system to report entities that have not filed their FAR on time?
I don't know the answer to that one. That is one we might have to do a Q&A on, but I don't believe there would be a fee for such filing, but I would have to find out.
Is the FSC looking into providing a portal that approved MLRO COs access the business and company filings? For example, certificate of incorporation, trade license, register of directors, and shareholders. This would be easier for the updating of the CDD. The FSC can charge for each download or provide a paying subscription. I think that's government and everybody intertwined.
Yes, that's an interesting suggestion. We never adverse to charging fees, but that would be an interesting. That is something that would need further discussion because currently the agent has access to the information for the company it acts as agent for. So it can get that information through its own portal, through the Virgin system. And likewise, similar to registered directors, once you're the agent, you'll be able to see certain things on the register. So if you're talking about if you're the non-agent and you're trying to do CDD, then that is something totally different that we would have to have a discussion on. You can't see that information if you're not the agent. You would only be able to see public information through the public sort function. So it's an interesting question, but right now, no, that would have to be a detailed policy discussion and figuring out whether that is actually doable.
Is the registry planning to raise annual fees or any fees for 2025?
No, not for 2025.
No, that's good to hear. If any entity which has not formally determined its financial year and chooses to change its year end after January 1st, after filing was due, will the company be required to still file an AFR by September 20th, annual filing return by September 30th for 2023 period, even if changing its year end?
I believe I may have, if I get this wrong, don't hold me to it, but you can't you can't change your financial year and after the documents are due and say they're no longer due. So I believe that was the gist of the question. So once the financials once they become due, you can't just change your year end. There's some guidance in the order about how that works. I don't want to get specific because that one question just now was really specific. And usually when I get those, I have to sit down and take out my calendar and start to go through them. So I don't want to address that specifically, but once the deadline has approached and reached, you can't change your financial year and to say that you're no longer required to submit.
Generally, financial annual returns for December 31st, 2023 have been slow in arriving due to education and training. Due to August holidays, we expect September madness given also that the format of reporting is not in place for internal training, could a one-off extension of 60 days for year ends up to March 31st, 2024 be granted?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer. At this stage, I would say no. What I would say is that the industry needs to clearly communicate to us whatever difficulties it is having, and that type of concern we would see if we need to extend it. At this stage, because this is a forced filing period, we're particularly open to a significant level of leniency. There's going to be some teeth and pains here with how this is going to be rolled out. So leniency would have to be given in some regard. But if there is a significant issue here surrounding timing, I would advise the industry to officially communicate with us and see and do that before a couple weeks before the deadline, so we are able to make an informed decision on what needs to be done. And I would prefer if that's done through the industry association as opposed to individual persons writing, because through the association we will get a better idea of the size of the problem.
Okay. So I guess the industry will be ready for you to give some leniency since you said that.
No, I mean, we've constantly said that in relation to the forced filing. There's going to be some growing pains here. It is not, the purpose is not for us to penalize folks at this stage at all. It is for us to get the information, and it is for us to see how the process is actually working. That doesn't mean some people may not be penalized, but we need to be, the industry needs to communicate clearly to us what the issues they're finding, and then we would have to be in a position to make a more informed decision.
So I guess the answer to the question is yes, but not a specific 60 days extension.
I think in the long and short, I said we're open to the suggestion if it can be proven that it is required.
What is the time frame in which the FSC will expect the industry to follow the amendments in the new legislation?
Immediately. Immediately. Some of it is going to have transitional provisions. Again, none of our legislation, none of them are actually retroactive. So it would be from the date as it comes into force as usual.
Okay. How many VASP licenses has the Commission issued to date, and will the FSC expedite the VASP regulatory process for getting into the VASP?
So, no, let me address the VASP issue since I have this question, because I think there's a lot of issues to unpack with the VASP. We still have two. There are only two we have approved. There are a number of them which can get across the finish line, but it's right now it's on the entity side to provide finalized information. What I would say, and I'll just go into the VASP, some issues with the VASP while I'm here, Elise, with this. What I would say is that when we look across the board, and I think the industry needs to realize this, is 90% of our applicants are actually people who have already commenced business. They were in business before. All of those persons were required to fully comply with the AML legislation as of December 2022. So we have to make that assessment. Many of the persons are not so normally compliant with those type of issues, understanding the risk, etc. Having said that, we have been able to, many have been able to put systems in place, demonstrate that they have systems in place, etc. So some of those would get over the hurdle in a few. Right now, I think the industry looks at it from maybe their individual perspective. There is no application that we have outstanding that we haven't given an initial response to. So we're still waiting for things from folks. There's some that we have response from that we are analyzing. This takes a significant period of time simply because it's a different type of assessment. These are people, as we say, carrying on business, most of them. And these are things we have to test the systems before they're granted a license, look at them. It's very much more in depth than your typical TCSP licensee who's just setting up their shop. So that's difficult. There's also the difficulty, frankly speaking, I think the industry should be fully well aware of that many of these entities operate across various jurisdictions. So we have to involve our international cooperation mechanisms, which in itself takes time. And I could tell you some of that poses some difficulties. There is also in this sector, whilst we have the legislation, many of these entities as well are carrying out activities akin or tangential to virtual asset service provider activities, but are not specifically covered under the legislation. But there are a significant portion of their activities and things that we have to consider, for example, staking and asset lending. These are things that the legislation doesn't actually prescribe, and they're significant. And some entities may, and these are my words, may be even operating similar to what we would term a crypto bank, meaning their business is lending crypto assets. So these are things that are significant. Um, but as I said, having said that, the greatest issue is for them to demonstrate AML CFT compliance. Many of them have been able to do so recently. There is going to be um, some other issues that we face with the systems that they have. Um, there's going to be some concerns surrounding what the travel rule, which as we're going to be issuing some guidance on the travel rule as well. We also have additional concerns surrounding some of the newer applicants who had actually already commenced business. As well, we have to deal with whether or not they're in breach of the legislation. Now, I say that and not to concern everyone in the industry, but we're fully well open to licensing and authorizing people, but they have to meet the standards. And I think many of them are trying to get towards the standards, and we're hoping in the next few weeks or so, some of them would get cross the border with such standards. Um, so that's as much as I could say on the VASP side.
Yes, but I think, Glenford, people still have a lot of questions. The last months ago, we were told that there were 80 plus applications. I'm not sure if it's increased. And when were the 2 approvals given months ago? Were there any denials of applications or any disapprovals?
No, there hasn't been any disapprovals, but I would say that clearly, like any regime, there are applicants who probably does not meet the threshold that we would expect.
I think what the industry had indicated is they were looking for patterns. Have you seen any patterns develop so far that you can give them some indication on exactly what it is that would be the threshold for approval or the threshold for disapproval?
There is no pattern. All of these applications are totally different from each other. There is actually there's I would just step back. There are 2 patterns really: the fit and proper assessment, which most people pass, and then the AML regime pad. Again, the issue here is when you have a new applicant and you're looking at the AML regime is whether they set up the policies and procedures in place. But now you have entities who literally are conducting business and have tens of thousands of clients. So it's not just a matter of procedures anymore. It's a matter of whether your procedures are effective, whether you're implementing them, whether you're risk assessing your clients. We have to go through that process before we actually say you have reached the threshold. So it's a difference. Um, we haven't seen any two VASP application that are even remotely the same.
That's quite interesting. Is there any indication that you will be able to improve, and I use this word very lightly, the next batch very soon?
We're prepared to approve. It's just a matter of people have to provide us with that last piece of information. Like I said, I think the last time we spoke, we were expecting to already approve some of those folks because they were so close, and we would have expected to receive the information we had requested. But like I said, it's not that we adverse to approval. We just need them to meet the requirements, get over the hurdle, and then we would grant those type of approvals. So to us, it's not necessarily on our shoulders to grant persons approvals. It's on their shoulders to make us comfortable that they meet the threshold to grant such approval, and having understand and consider the nature of the risk of VASP. I think that is paramount.
We just want to ensure that we maintain our competitive edge in this very competitive industry, so we don't miss opportunity in that regard. So I'll move on to the next question. Should companies, but if you want to comment on that, please do. Should companies have an extension for the first annual return?
I think this is the same question before about the timeline. We have to get from the industry what really is happening, and whether they're having difficulties, and whether companies are having difficulties, and whether we need to consider granting any extension. As of now, is not on our agenda, but I mean, if the industry is seeing specific issues, it needs to then communicate to us.
For annual returns, when would we report entities that have not provided, I think you answered this question already, provided their financial year end, and so we do not know when their deadline is?
Yes, I think that's an interesting question, because you would have to know the financial year end to report the entity. And that is on you to get that information, and then to understand whether the entity hasn't filed. But I think there's going to be a point where everybody should have or would have filed. But as an agent, you would have to make that determination.
A penalty of $3,000 to the registered agent for not reporting non-filings of annual returns per company not reported, or only one time for the agent?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think everything is each individual breach. But I'll have to review that. But I think it's each individual breach. So if you have 100 companies who have not filed for the particular period, and you haven't reported, it technically is 100 different breaches.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that that you have to. It means you just need to know your systems and report if that's the case.
If we report an entity for failing to submit the annual return, and then they supply it, will we need to inform the registry afterwards?
Yes.
will the, okay. Has the commission given thought to having senior officer status granted for a period of time, say 3 years, and not subject to a new application if you change jobs, provided there are no material changes in the applicant's status?
The answer is no. It's an interesting thought. Then you're talking about have a register of senior officers, etc., etc. But not all senior officers are equal. Not all businesses are equal. So we'll have to, that would have to be given serious thought as to how such a system would actually work.
Will the FSC reconsider decision that filings of information on beneficial owners for existing companies during the transitional period be made outside of the BVI, considering the volume of work involved and the manpower required? And that's a question we've gotten to pass on to you, and we have previously from a number of persons.
That sounds like a multi-layered question because it's presumed that someone is asking us to open the Virgin system in allowing those transactions. There is no thought of that currently. So if the industry thinks something needs to be done, it needs to make a proposal, but I could tell you that would be a difficult one. And there's currently no thought about allowing or opening that system to such.
For executive directors who have been approved by the FSC for a supervised financial institution in this jurisdiction, can you confirm whether they are able to secure an ad hoc approval to get access, a similar question, to the Virgin system? Are there any considerations and exemptions in this matter?
No.
For beneficial ownership reporting, is the commission view that an entity should report anyone who meets the threshold, that is 10/25%, and anyone exercising control?
That is the definition of beneficial ownership, so that is what has to be submitted.
In your opinion, what is the identity of the territory as a financial services industry? It was historically and simplistically known as a company formations jurisdiction. Given recent advancement and improvements, where would you say we are now, and what sets us apart from others? How do you see the territory evolving in the future? I don't think we've ever said we're just a company formations jurisdiction. And one of the things we've always said is BVI is not a one-trick pony. I mean, we have a diverse, maybe not as diverse as some other jurisdictions, but certainly we have funds, we have trusts, we introduced VASP. So we are not just company formation. Mr. Malone, can you give your
I think the appropriate person answered the question, which you just answered. So I wouldn't venture into it. But your point is absolutely correct. The jurisdiction is a multifaceted jurisdiction, and that doesn't mean we lose sight of the fact and the historical nature and what we would wish to continue, that the jurisdiction be a preeminent jurisdiction for company incorporation. That doesn't go away, but it also means that we also offer services, and we would regulate and supervise to the appropriate standard those services that are regulated activity, as well as I think you would mention value added and the like. It is to build the depth of the jurisdiction while ensuring that it's properly regulated.
Can you delve into the Commission's strategy for the inspections in more detail? While we've seen the notes and guidance issued, it would be helpful to know what percentage of licensees have been notified already, and what are your current observations?
Yes, well, we will be doing specific reports on the current observation, but I think this is a good point for me to just touch on the trust in desk-based reviews that we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing a number of trust-based reviews on trustees, effectively, class twos and restricted class threes, and on various topics. And the purpose of it, and I think when we look at the data, um, when we look at the restricted class two data, you see that restricted class twos and class two trust license probably accounts for perhaps about upwards of 65 to 75% of trust activity in the BVI. So we're looking at that sector as a whole, but we're not going to do these full scope inspections. We're looking at specific issues. As we say, the SARS filing, the CDD, institutional risk, etc. And the reason why we are looking at those are the areas which we deem might be posing the most difficulties. And the purpose of us is to understand what the industry is doing, whether it is in compliance, and as well as to provide some guidance is necessary. The purpose of the desk-based reviews are not necessarily to penalize anyone, but if you're in significant breaches, you may be penalized. We're looking for compliance. We're looking to provide guidance. We're looking to see the nature of the industry for our understanding, for your understanding, and coming out of those, we hope to provide some guidance as to best practices, things that we're seeing, and things that you need to. It might very well be coming out of those inspections. Um, we consider that you might need a more full scope type inspections. But the purpose really is for our understanding and for us to provide. We have looked at what the numbers in these industries look like, what the trust business looks like, and we think given the legal person and legal arrangements, issues in the mutual evaluation and the risk posed. That's why we selected the trust business to look at. And some of these entities, to be frank, they have not in the history, perhaps, of the commission looked so focused on these type of licenses and this type of activities. And this is why now we're taking a clear look at it. For the others, when you get the thematics from the compliance inspection unit, again, we're looking at some of the same things. We continue to see significant issues in the introduced business sector. Again, for us, I've said this in the past to anyone. I've said it at other venues. We're looking at the introduced business sector. If you're dealing with that type of business, you need to make sure your house is in order because you might get a letter. And we're still seeing people are able, as I said, people are able to tell me who the beneficial owner are, but people are not able to say they have appropriate agreements with the introducer. They're testing their introducer. They're taking steps where the introducer doesn't no longer reach the requirements. So these are things I think you have to pay particular attention to. For example, if someone's business is 2% introduced, that may not be relevant. But if somebody's business is 45% introduced business, that's significant. And we would have issues if you're not taking the appropriate step. Likewise, it's the same issue surrounding your enhanced CDD, your SARS filing, etc. It's just a matter of, again, we're saying we're sort of telling you what we're coming to look at. So even though we haven't said who we're looking at yet, we're telling you what we're coming to look at. So you as a compliance officer, MLRO should be looking to see, well, is it me that is wanting? But for us, we want to have a good story to tell, not that we do a lot of inspection, that we do inspections where people are compliant. That is what we're particularly we're looking for.
Will the FSC essentially provide a check list with the key components, expectations for a plain vanilla VASP application?
Well, if I see a plain vanilla VASP application, I would certainly send it out publicly, but I haven't seen one yet. Um, Again, what we want to do is we after this process, we want to be able to provide some guidance to the industry as to what is some of the things that we're seeing, some of the things that we have difficulties with. But right now, to say a vast application, they come in so much different flavor, and frankly speaking, depending on the person submitting the application, they come in a different quality than others. So we have that issue we have to deal with as well.
If the company does not inform the financial year, can it be considered that the financial year is the calendar year?
That would be up to the agent to make that determination. It registers the company, it monitors the companies. It should have an idea or take steps to get that information from the company.
I believe you answered this question, but in case it has a different nuance. For beneficial ownership reporting, is it that the Commission's view that an entity should report anyone who meets the threshold 10%, 25%, and anyone exercising control?
Yes, I think I answered that, and the answer is yes, is everyone.
Okay. I don't know if they're still having challenges hearing you, but we have another request.
Yes, sorry, might be speaking a bit low, but I'll try to speak up.
Okay. We apologize for that. For the transfer of UBO data from BOSS to Virgin, how long will we be given to meet those requirements once the legislation is set, as the process will be largely manual?
Let me be clear this address. There's no transfer of data from BOSS to any system the commission has functional. It's going to be uploaded by the agent to the new Virgin platform of the information, and there's going to be transitional provisions for the timeline for uploading that information.
How long will be, do you have an estimate?
Right now, I think the period is 6 months, and we prefer early filers.
If not done correctly for efficiency, would the FSC consider conducting an assessment for an approved person during their notice period if they have already resigned and their next role requires approval? Similar to,
Repeat that again, Elise. I didn't get a first part.
I said, if not done currently, sorry, for efficiency, would the FSC consider conducting an assessment for an approved person during their notice period if they have already resigned and their next role requires approval?
That's up to whomever the next role is when the application is going to be submitted. We don't have any regard to that employment status except in relation to assessing your fit and proper, whether you're terminated for reasons and stuff like that. But no, it's up to you. If you and them reach an agreement and they submit the application, then we will process it.
Will the FSC assess resources in relation to licensees, their clients, and CO and MLRO appointments?
We always assess resources and the functions. So the resources of the MLRO and likewise would be assessed similar to how we would assess the compliance officer function. Maybe not as that level, but similar to that.
Okay, we're winding down, so if you have any last questions, please put them in the Q&A. What is the Commission's final position on nominee directors and inserting this information in the Register of Directors?
Final decision is the House of Assembly when the legislation is passed. Like I said, we made the comments came in from the industry that the nominee director concept. I think we've removed that. We've relied on the principles and issues that would capture where you're acting on behalf of persons, but the term nominee director, I don't think is used. The way information is captured on the registers has been changed. I think there was some concern as to whether we're prescribing too much, so the information would be collected by the commission, but may or may not appear on the register. And in that case, I think that would satisfy the industry's concerns surrounding this concept of nominee directors and shareholders.
I'm just reviewing the topics that we said we would cover in this session. Just to go back, I don't think we discussed.
I don't think we get to the last two, the travel rule.
The travel rule, yes.
And the guidance. So I'll just
go through those.
So yeah, I'll just speak to the travel rule and the guidance. So I did mention earlier in relation to VASP, we're going to issue some guidance on the travel rule because we think that is something material, and some of the entities are having some difficulties with it. So we'll issue some guidance on that. That is expected to come out within the next few weeks. We've already drafted that. We're gonna as well be doing some investment business guidance, which is complete, and we would get those out as well quite shortly. We intend as well to do some guidance on beneficial ownership and control. That too we intend to issue by the end of the year. We consider that some entities need further clarification on risk factors for suspicious activity. And as I said earlier, in conjunction with the FIA and the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force as well, we would be doing some new guidance on such risk factors, guidance on how to monitor legal persons and legal arrangement. Again, that was the concern that I raised earlier. You have a company, you're doing your risk assessment, you need to monitor the company. How do you do that? And as well as coming out of our inspections, we need to take a look at introduce business and provide some specific guidance on how we expect to see introduced business, how we expect it to be done, and when we come on site, what we expect to see. So the goal of this is to help the industry in the level of compliance during inspections or desk-based reviews, and those guidance should then be helpful for those.
Can you give us a timeline? You said shortly. What's shortly look like?
We envisage that most of these guidance would be by the end of the year. The travel rule and investment business, we're aiming to do those by the end of August, and then the rest would be intermittently as the year comes down.
We have a couple of last questions, and then we'll cut off. There are some jurisdictions that can provide base minimum risk assessment templates sectorially. Would this be something the FSC considers?
When they say risk, do they mean for their risk assessment? For example, an institutional risk assessment template? I mean,
Institutional risk assessment, yes.
One of
And
the
what,
things we were accused of in the mutual evaluation report is that the institutional risk assessments are generic. So a template would create more generic nature of risk assessment. And I would say from some of what we're seeing too is we're seeing a generic assessment of institutional risk. For example, you see an entity that its client base is significantly high risk clients, yet still its institutional risk assessment is low. Um, that I mean that might be um, that's the reason for that is difficult to think about as a supervisor, because if all or substantial amount of your clients are high risk, you can't say that your business itself is low risk. There has to be some risk taking into consideration the product and services and the clients that you deal with. So it's just a matter of, yes, there might be a template and perhaps you need to consider a template, but the individual circumstances of licensees needs to be borne in mind when you're looking at institutional risk assessments.
can you elaborate a bit more on institutional risk assessments?
Well, for when you and again, the code is pretty specific. AML code is pretty specific on what you look at. And I just use one example. I just use it when you're looking at the product and services you offer. Now, if you offer straight out incorporation services, no strings attached, that may be fine. But what if you're offering nominee shareholders, you're offering corporate director services, you're offering other ancillary services, as well as you're offering that services to higher risk clients, maybe specifically clients who may be sanctions persons, um, those possess higher risk. So when you're dealing with your institutional clientele, institutional risk, you need to bear that in mind. If you're in the business of insurance, for example, providing life insurance policies or car insurance, your risk is different from a TCSP that provides all of the services that are licensable by the commission and provides that services to clients all around the world that uses 60% introduced business persons from all around the world. These are things you have to take into your institutional risk assessment. Um, I think the question for us, what that question raises and which is in our mind we continue to consider is how to help the industry with how to do institutional risk assessment. And we've been bantering that around internally through whether through guidance, whether perhaps we might have to do maybe something through the RMI about institutional risk assessment to assist the industry in getting it done. But we certainly understand the question, but pay close attention to the explanatory notes in the AML code, which provides some good guidance on things you need to be take into consideration with your institutional risk assessments.
Okay, there's a question, what about client risk assessment?
Again, similar issues. You only could assess the client's risk if you collect the information to assess the client risk. I think for us, what we see on inspections when it comes to risk assessment is people have pretty good policies and procedures about how to assess risk, but they're not implementing them. And that's the difficulty that we have. You might say if a person is in a particular jurisdiction, you rate them as a higher level of risk, but when we look at it, it doesn't happen. So it's not a matter of policies and procedures. It's a matter of implementing. And risk doesn't stop at the stage of the initial assessment. It goes back to what we talk about monitoring, and monitoring is very important. You need to know how you're monitoring, what risk categories may change for your client, and be able to then generate appropriate risk assessment or risk profile of that client.
And I think that translates into the whole mutual evaluation report. We have effective legislation, effective policies and procedures in place, but effective implementation is where there was a challenge. Mr. Malone, you can also speak about the Commission's expectation on achieving effective monitoring for legal persons and arrangements.
Yes, and all effective monitoring is going to come down through, for us, is going to be through inspections and the like. For the industry, it's really going to be through knowing your customer. That, to me, that is the bottom line. If the industry knows the person they're dealing with, and again, we don't expect that everybody is gonna be fully compliant in terms of, you don't have a client who you might have to file a SAR on. But once you have to file a SAR, it is file efficiency is filed by quality. Once the legal person and legal arrangement risk assessment is completed, we hope to then communicate that to the industry, which will help them to look at specifically more what needs to be done. You just need to be, again, somebody comes to incorporate a company, you need to know who they are, what that company is doing, what the expectations are. Do you need to monitor them as a high-risk person? Do you need to monitor this company as a low-risk person? And then, intermittently, it is not, monitoring is not waiting for the annual return to be filed. That is not monitoring. That is just filing a document. There has to be some additional steps in between where you identify the higher risk and take those steps. Again, we fall back to the AML legislation, the AML code, and again, we're thinking about how we could provide further guidance on those to the industry.
Okay, I think we have one topic that we didn't cover, which was targeted financial sanctions, and we're being asked to.
Yes, yes. Let me quickly comment on that, because I think from when we look at inspections in relation to targeted financial sanctions, folks have policies, procedures in place. They're doing some screening, etc. But the issue surrounds the timing of the screening and your ability to screen immediately once the designation is made, as well as what do you do if you have a hit. I think the Russian sanction has taught the industry and ourselves a lot about what to do. And we just have to continue to implement those. Yeah, again, screening has to be done immediately upon when a designation is made, and then you have to, if you find someone, you have any assets, you have to immediately freeze those and then make the disclosure to the governor's office, etc., etc. Please read the guidance, the sanctions guidance. Those are extremely helpful. We're in the process, well, when I say we, the jurisdiction is in the process of amending those sanction guidelines to be more clear and more specific. Hopefully we'll be issuing them within the next 2 or so months, and that would provide some additional guidance. We as well are doing more inspections surrounding targeted financial sanctions, which for our purposes also includes the Russian sanctions. And we hopefully would continue to see a desired level of compliance.
We have just a couple minutes to wrap up, and we have this last question. In the event that a client born in a high-risk jurisdiction, but has since moved and obtained residence, and in some instances nationality in a low-risk G20 jurisdiction, and has fully repatriated, can this serve to mitigate the risk posed, given that licensee should now engage a risk-based approach to risk mitigation?
Yeah, the question is not absolute, as the person seemed to imply, because I move from jurisdiction A to jurisdiction B may not decrease my risk, may not decrease the risk that I pose to you, to the system. The people that I was engaged in, the people that I'm connected to, that may not have changed. Yes, it's a factor that you would say, okay, they're no longer operating in this jurisdiction. A component of the risk has changed, but does that really change the overall activity of the parsing and the connections of the parsings and what the parsing does? So let's not be so categoric. It can have an impact, but if it was me personally, um, it only could have a material impact for a period of time after the move, maybe a year or so, when I could have a more judgment on what the person have actually done, etc. And those are not guidance specifically from the commission, but my personal views.
Okay, we're going to go over a bit of time just so that we can answer the follow-up questions that have been generated as a result of the targeted sanctions comments. And will the sanctions guidelines speak more about discretionary beneficiaries and legal arrangements connected to a designated person? Currently, the guidelines don't delve too deeply on legal arrangements.
I would hesitate to actually comment too much on the guidance because it's not our guidance. But as I said, we amended them, and I think you can send your comments directly to us if you want those things addressed. I'm making a note of it, but frankly speaking, I don't want to say we would amend that section, but we're looking at making it more clearer and ability to be user friendly for the industry.
Okay. If the registry rejects a service as a person related to the company may be included in a sanctions list, can this be communicated to the client or will it be considered tipping off?
Well, if or when that transaction is refused, and I presume what is done is what we do is we don't process a transaction and we say to the persons, okay, this look like a connected person. Have you done your appropriate due diligence? Have you engaged the governor's office is necessary? And you need to tell us. Um, I don't think there's an issue of tipping off here because a sanctioned person is a sanctioned person, and you have to do your due diligence to understand if the person is connected. So in order to understand if the person is connected, you have to ask a question. This is not a SARS filing. This is for you to verify whether someone is sanctioned or not.
Okay, so we are going to end on this question, Glenford. Do you see the Business Companies Act amendments being passed in the House before the end of August? This would make the 6-month transitional period ending in February 2025.
We don't have no control over that. What I would say is the jurisdiction is committed as a whole to satisfying the recommendation and mutual evaluation report. And one of the deadlines that we're working towards is the middle of September. So we're hoping to have, as much as possible, all those legislation that I would have referred to pass by that time. And so then you can count the 6 months back from then. So you have a general guidance. These are matter of priority for the jurisdiction, and it is expected those would be passed as soon as possible.
This has been a very informative and intense discussion. We thank the Deputy Managing Director of Regulation from the BVI Financial Services Commission, Mr. Glenford Malone, for joining us for this discussion today. We've covered quite an extensive array of topics. And as you've heard from Mr. Malone himself, that if you have specific questions that you would like answered by the Financial Services Commission, please feel free to contact him directly or contact his office. You can also send them to BVI Finance and we ensure that we pass them on. And Mr. Malone, I'm putting you on the spot. We need a session 2 because we still have questions left to be answered. I think we're going to have a meet the regulator coming up shortly and specifically to address some of these topics that we've spoken about today. But we also want to invite you back as soon as possible, maybe after the August holidays, to have session 2 of this discussion. This has been another BVI Finance Forum. I don't know if Mr. Malone wanted to say anything before we sign off. So,
Yeah,
Mr.
just briefly, Elise, and again to thank you and your team, but again to thank the participants and the industry for some very pressing questions. I think they were the right and focused questions. And I think these type of seminars where we banter around the actual issues are helpful. Reach out to me, as Elise says, reach out to Elise, and we provide as much guidance as possible. But look out in the future for more of this and more of the commission's own outreach as well. Thanks again, Elise, to you and your team.
And we want to thank all 300 plus of you for coming on today's session. We really appreciate, and we appreciate your questions. I think they've helped us to elevate our industry more. And so again, we'll be hearing more from Mr. Malone and his team as the weeks go by. And so we'll expect to see him here after August. So we'll be right back here for session 2. This has been another BVI Finance Breakfast Forum, and we thank you so much for joining us, and do have a pleasant day.